You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. Good morning. It is Friday, June 21st. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. We have another hot day on tap for much of this country today. And then what's most interesting, it's what's going to be happening in St. Louis, Missouri. Super interesting stuff. If you don't know the weather, you can basically totally escape this interesting fact. But if you're aware of the weather synopsis, it's super interesting on Sunday. A cold front moves into the St. Louis area, producing super high heat indices. Amazing. Meaning tomorrow temperatures are high, but the heat index remains probably under 100 degrees, maybe close to that. On Sunday, a cold front moves into the area. Ahead of the cold front, all of that humidity, the typical St. Louis humidity has not been in place for the past several days. In fact, St. Louis, since it's been hot, but the humidity has been lacking. It's not the classic St. Louis humidity. Well, on Sunday, that changes. As the front moves into the St. Louis area, it also gathers a lot of humidity right in front of the front. So, areas just to the south of the front will see the classic heat and humidity build into the St. Louis area again. Those 70-degree dew points will make a comeback, and heat indices could well pass 100 degrees, perhaps even higher than that. But if you're behind the front, so the humidity will be significant over there as well, but the temperatures will probably be only in the 80s. Either way, the National Weather Service tells us that it will be hot on Sunday. But there could be some thunderstorms. The heat returns. The heat returns for Monday and Tuesday in St. Louis, and this time around, however, it comes with a lot of humidity. Dew points in the 70s. No more 60s dew points or even 50s dew points. Dew points go back into the 70s. Heat indices hit 105. That's Monday. Tuesday, temperatures may even hit 100 degrees along with the high humidity. So heat advisory criteria may be needed on Tuesday, maybe even Monday. Headed into the rest of next week, St. Louis is in a very interesting spot. It's almost like a sitcom because you have the upper high, our ridge, which was originally all the way on the East Coast, originally in the Pennsylvania area to the Mid-Atlantic area, but the center of the ridge really extended. You go into Ohio as well, but St. Louis was also part of this whole heat dome. St. Louis was part of it. Then this upper ridge starts moving west. It's currently over the Tennessee Valley, and then it's headed to Phoenix, Arizona, and St. Louis remains part of the heat dome. There might be one day next week on Wednesday where St. Louis escapes the heat dome for a day, but there's a good chance that the heat returns on Thursday. And even that day, that one day, I would be shocked if the temperatures are really that low. And Sunday is a question mark for parts of St. Louis due to thunderstorms and how far south the front will make it. But the areas that remain in the heat on Sunday will actually be hottest on Sunday. And even areas behind the front, if you're exercising, it's going to be worse on Sunday. I've noticed that a dew point of 72 is when things really start to feel very intense, and that's more important than the temperature when you're exercising. You could also look up the wet bulb temperature, which is very much dependent on dew point, and that's probably the most accurate way to figure out what the situation is like when you're exercising in the shade. Wet bulb globe temperature would be most accurate when you're exercising in the sun. So anything of 80 and higher with those wet bulb temperatures is really very intense heat. And then we have areas in Texas today, some portions hitting a wet bulb temperature of 80, also portions of Missouri. Okay, going into Iowa. The high today is a very special day for the dew point, for the humidity, and because we've been missing that Midwest Corn Belt humidity up until today, it's been missing. It's been gone. It's been a mystery, a big mystery. Where are they? Where are the 70-degree dew points? Not just 70, 75, 76, 78. Where are they? Iowa can easily get into the 80s for dew points. Why are the dew points not in the 70s? Well, whatever the answer to that question is, we no longer have such a question for today. Forecasted dew points going into the mid and even upper 70s for the cornfields of Iowa. You know, a lot of times you'll see if the forecasted dew points are mid and upper 70s, the following day you'll see a whole bunch of weather stations coming out of Knoxville, Iowa, of dew points of 80 degrees. You'll see stuff like that. So the Midwest Corn Belt humidity of 70s is back. In the following segment, there were times I accidentally said Iowa, but I meant to say Ohio. The previous segment was correctly said as Iowa, but you'll be able to pick up from the context that it is Ohio. And headed into Ohio as well. That's another area where you'll see an area. I don't know what the shot is. I don't know what's going on in Iowa. I don't understand why the dew points are so high when you head into the northern portions of Iowa. Now, the northwestern portions of Iowa, you have Lake Erie there. And it's a big question mark. It would be such a shocker. I know we've been talking about this. It's such a shocker to say that Lake Erie would be contributing to the humidity because the Great Lakes water temperatures in general would just be too cold. It can't really be contributing to anything higher than the water temperature unless we look into this really deeply. But on the surface, let's say, it's usually not going to be higher than the water temperature. In fact, it's usually 10 degrees lower than the water temperature. If you go to the Gulf Coast, let's say in the summertime, the water temperature outside Miami, upper 80s, 89 degrees. You know, the dew points in Miami, mid 70s, up to 79 degrees or so. But you could get dew points up to the water temperature. New Orleans has a tendency to pull that off. It's happened. It's happened before. Going into the Great Lakes, Lake Erie is the warmest of all the Great Lakes, especially around Toledo, Ohio. It looks like that's where the warming is most intense. The Windy.com is advertising water temperatures today of widespread 75 degrees. The National Weather Service has their weather stations. They're reporting from what it was yesterday. And the highest I see is by Toledo at 72 degrees. And then there's plenty of 60s. So the Windy.com, though, seems to match what the forecast dew points are going to be like in that area. And it does look like, unlike Lake Michigan, where the winds off Lake Michigan lower the dew points. The humidity gets lower. You know, if you ask Chicagoans, why is it humid here? First of all, is it humid here in the summer? They'll tell you yes. Why is it humid in the summer? They'll say because of Lake Michigan. I've asked people. It's not Lake Michigan at all. First of all, the closer you are to the Gulf of Mexico, the more consistent the humidity is going to be. St. Louis is almost in a different climate, tells us meteorologist Tom Skilling. When it comes to summer, he did not draw a line. He wasn't able to draw the line of exactly when the climate changes, but it's somewhere between Chicago and St. Louis that there's a summer climate change where it's just continuously summer in St. Louis with high humidity under the Gulf of Mexico influence. Chicago doesn't have that. You have cold fronts that come in off the Great Lakes, so you occasionally do get those hot and humid bursts, but plenty of cold fronts off the Great Lakes. But here you have by Lake Erie, you have a tropical air mass which has come over to the Lake Erie area. We have something much more fascinating than this, so just hold on for a second. But we have Detroit, Michigan. Those cities have dew points in the 70s. We We have another area which likely has dew points in the 70s, and that's right around where all the thunderstorm activity has been taking place. I'm attributing it to that. It started off in Caribou, Maine, with a dew point around 70 degrees. That's going to be the focus point for thunderstorms into Saturday, and that was not exactly supposed to happen. Yeah, so that's up at around places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, Toronto. Frequent. These are the areas where the most frequent downpours are going to be occurring. That comes from the New York Times, something that is rarely looked at, but it's stalled front from dividing hot and humid air to the southwest from the cooler and less humid air to the northeast will be the focus for thunderstorms Saturday, today through Saturday. Thunderstorms may be severe as they move towards the southeast direction. In areas where there are repeating storms, there will be the risk for flash flooding and travel disruptions. So you have the areas in the less humid air, which is Maine. Maine is out of it right now. But you still have Boston. They're right behind the front in the cooler air. Manchester, Burlington, these places might be getting downpours. In areas south of the front, you could be getting the most frequent downpours due to thunderstorm activity. And it remains humid in those locations. But, much of the Midwest is still dew points only in the 60s. Even when you get to the Gulf Coast, depending on where your source is, what the source is that you're looking at, you could be looking at some areas with dew points in the low 70s, sometimes upper 60s. So we don't really have the real humidity yet. But Sunday is when it arrives for a city like St. Louis. St. Louis is having a very difficult time escaping the heat because they seem to be involved in the heat regardless of whether the heat dome is on the East Coast or it's not exactly on the West Coast. It heads down to around New Mexico or so. It doesn't seem to center itself over Phoenix. From what I saw, the Phoenix National Weather Service was telling us the other day that depending on where it positions itself, that's going to determine the surface winds into Phoenix. And if the surface winds should come in off the Gulf of Mexico, that's when you have the monsoon moisture. And there seems to be no question that southeast Arizona will be involved in this, and at times Phoenix, Arizona as well. On the other hand, you still have the real dry air up in northwest Arizona, so the dry line will be moving back and forth. It will be the focus point for thunderstorms. But as much as they talk about thunderstorms, the precipitation doesn't really seem to make it to the lower deserts. It seems to evaporate before hitting the ground. So dry thunderstorms, a major cause for fire and stuff like that. But you have the desert, so not much fuel over there. But the main concern was blowing dust, tells us the National Weather Service of Phoenix. Each place has its own concern, and people who live out there are more familiar with that situation, with the blowing dust. But one thing to point out is that Yuma, Arizona has another source for humidity, and that's the Gulf of California. That area is a scorcher when it comes to humidity. In that place, you could get dew points well into the 70s, just like that, within 1 hour, and then it goes away. So you could have some scorching stuff that occurs in Yuma, Arizona in particular, whereas Phoenix, Arizona, you might make temperatures feel a little bit hotter, tells us the National Weather Service, due to dew points reaching 60 or the low 60s. The most unique part over here is the St. Louis area, where you have, they said the heat dangers will increase on Sunday due to the cold front. Due to the cold front, there'll be a higher risk for heat danger activity. It's very interesting stuff. You don't hear that for most cities. We've spoken about the Caspian Sea before, but let's go back to it. I want to point something out. The coldest of all the Great Lakes here in the U.S. is Lake Superior. 47 degrees north latitude goes right through Lake Superior. 47 degrees north latitude goes right through the Caspian Sea in Russia. Lake Superior, low 50s currently are the water temperatures. Windy.com. Caspian Sea, water temperatures 88 degrees. 88 degrees. Now, if you look up individual weather stations, I found 3 and it ranges from 76 to 79. But even there, it said over the summer you could find isolated spots. Now, listen to this. We need a drum roll for this. I don't have a drum roll. Isolated spots to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, it only talks in Celsius. It says 35 degrees Celsius. That's 95 degrees Fahrenheit. 95 degrees Fahrenheit up in the Caspian Sea is what you could expect as we go through the summer. So 88 degrees right now is certainly normal. It certainly sounds reasonable. It's due to the shallow water. This is like unbelievable stuff. This is really far up north, hundreds of miles north of Chicago. You know, St. Louis is at 38 degrees north latitude, Chicago 40 degrees north latitude, and you have it's a 300-mile distance. It's a little, okay? So here we're dealing with, let's say Chicago is 40 degrees north latitude. So this is 47 degrees north latitude. So it's 3 times the distance as St. Louis is to Chicago, something like that. Or maybe Chicago to Springfield, maybe that would be more accurate. But this is 3 times the distance going all the way up north. You know, the Lake Michigan water temperatures here in Chicago are in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And again, you go up there, 80, it's not just that. You can't even find a place in the Gulf of Mexico right now where it's 88 degrees, probably because of the tropical storm. Sometimes in Miami, by the end of June, you have water temperatures of 89 degrees. I will point out that last summer we saw at National Everglade Park, the temperature was 101 degrees, informed us the Washington Post. And then I brought a thermometer into the Dead Sea in Israel in just one day, and the water temperature was 102 degrees. So we have super hot stuff, but this is really intense stuff occurring up in Russia, and apparently occurs every year. We currently have temperatures in the 90s as we speak. We currently have temperatures in the mid-90s up there. Winds are off the Caspian Sea in many situations. Some of these cities are on the western side of the Caspian Sea. The winds are from the west in all of these cities. So forecast highs well into the 90s at times. We even have some hundreds forecasted for some of those cities. So Russia has quite a reputation around the world as being very cold, especially Siberia. But we've been seeing Siberian temperatures going into the 90s as well. It's not clear. The windy.com is not clear on which part of Russia these things are taking place, but some of this is in Russia. We have really warm temperatures headed into Norway over the next several days. Temperatures generally the 70s, but we do have 80s on the way, mid-80s by the time you get into next week, tells us the European computer model. That makes sense. The solar insolation is very high when you get up into the Arctic. There's very few people that know this. Most people don't even know what solar insolation is, and it's hard to find information about it. So, solar insolation, I don't know if I'm going to say what it is, but it's the amount of solar activity. One thing is clear, it's the amount of solar activity that is reaching the ground, especially if the skies are clear during the entire day. The heating that occurs from the sun when the skies are clear the entire day, if you have the most solar insolation up there, that's where there would be the most heating. That's the way I understand it. And whereas down south, even though the sun is more direct, this time of the year, there's less solar insolation. And it's not simple. It doesn't go from less to more as you go north. It reaches its peak around 42 degrees north latitude, and then it starts to drop. And then it increases again by the Arctic Circle when you get a little bit past 66 degrees north latitude. So the only trick to all this is that practically speaking, the solar insolation will be most down south. Practically speaking, because all you need is to have 6 hours of sunshine down south to get brutal stuff. The rest of the day could be cloudy, but if you have 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., something like that, you got big time solar insolation. When you get up north, you really need the skies to be clear all day. It's the length of the days that's doing it. The days are longer. That's why there's more solar insolation. But you really need clear skies. A solid heat dome would do it. And that's when you get those temperatures really starting to sizzle. The reason why it's not super hot up there is because, first of all, they're still close to the Arctic, where you have the Arctic Ocean, where it's all ice, and the winds turn off the Arctic Ocean, so you get cooler temperatures no matter what. Secondly, they're still warming up and trying to recover from the winter. When you have, especially places which are near any type of body of water. Thank you for listening. I wish everybody a wonderful day and stay safe. Have a great weekend and a good Shabbos. Good morning. It's Friday, June 21st, 2024. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. This is going to be brief. I'm just going to share with you some of the computer models, what they're saying for the St. Louis area for this upcoming weekend. Sunday is going to be the most complex day. I hope to also share what the National Weather Service is telling us for this upcoming weekend. Well, we're just going to be looking actually at the European computer model for this upcoming weekend. We're going to start off with today for the St. Louis area. We're looking for a European computer model as advertised on windy.com for University City, Missouri. Shows high temperatures today going up to around 93 degrees, but dew points around 62 degrees. That's barely any type of a heat index. About a 63 degree heat index. No precipitation expected at all. Shabbos, for Saturday, we're looking at a high around 98 degrees. Dew point 60 degrees, dropping into the upper 50s. No heat index at all. Sunday, after that front moves through, the dew points skyrocket, going up to the dew point hitting 73 degrees by noon on Sunday. Temperatures going up to a high around 93 with a maximum dew point at that time of 69 degrees. Heat index approximately 98 degrees. Going into Tuesday, that's going to be the peak heating. So we're going to have a dew point of 74 degrees by 4 p.m. That's after a thunderstorm, which will drop temperatures to 87 degrees. Heat indices in the mid-90s. But at 1 p.m., temperature 100 degrees with dew point of 68 degrees, putting our heat index at about 105 degrees. So although technically it will be hotter on Saturday, maybe even the heat index will be hotter, but for those people who are exercising, if the forecast does materialize Sunday afternoon, it's going to feel worse Sunday afternoon. We should also point out that the wind will put a big damper on the heat for Sunday, but by the time you hit, but for Saturday, the wind's actually going to make it feel hotter, since temperatures will be higher than 95 degrees, and the same with Tuesday. That could make a very big difference. I wish everybody a wonderful day. The final 3 minutes is a focus on St. Louis only. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. We have a powerhouse typhoon which has developed off in the Pacific Ocean. Extreme heat continues over the desert southwest. A big shockaroo to many of you. This is especially true in regards to what's going to be going on in Alaska. We have parts of the world that are so hot right now. Temperatures are expected to go into the low 130s. What also makes the situation absolutely spectacular over there is the enormous differences between night and day. We have a remarkable weather pattern change that's going to be taking place over the next few days. We're going from one extreme to the next extreme. Small soft hail is falling with the storm. There's the possibility that snow squalls may develop. 27.1 barometric pressure. Feet of snow are falling in Japan when there's intense weather. That's a time of celebration. Just Google weather with enthusiasm and they're all gonna come up.